I'm Paige, 32. 2 hours ago, my 10-year-old son whispered words that turned my world upside down. Mommy, we can't go home. I heard Daddy on the phone saying something bad would happen to us when we got back. The fear in Jazz's voice wasn't the kind kids fake for attention. This was real terror. And it hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely blindsided by someone you trusted. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Let me back up to this morning. Grant, my husband of 12 years, was rushing around our bedroom like a tornado in a three-piece suit. Another business trip, another weekend alone with Jazz while he wheeled and dealed his way through whatever investment scheme was keeping us in our comfortable suburban lifestyle. I should mention that Grant treated me like part of the furniture, useful when needed, invisible otherwise. After years of his condescending remarks and casual dismissals, I developed a pretty thick skin and an even thicker sense of sarcasm. Because honestly, what else was I going to do? Cry into my coffee every morning? Please. Stop at CVS before the airport, Grant barked, not bothering to look up from his phone. Need to grab something for my stomach. This deal's got me stressed. I loaded Jazz into our SUV and pulled into the pharmacy parking lot. Grant hopped out with his usual impatience, leaving his briefcase on the passenger seat. That's when Jazz dropped his bombshell from the back seat, his voice barely above a whisper. Mommy, I heard Daddy talking to someone last night. He said bad things would happen to us when we came home from dropping him off. My blood turned to ice water. Jazz wasn't a dramatic kid. He was quiet, observant, the type who noticed everything and said little. When he spoke up about something, it mattered. What exactly did you hear, baby? He said, they'll handle the problem when I'm gone. And then he said our names, Mommy, yours and mine. I stared at Grant through the pharmacy window, watching him joke with the cashier like he didn't have a care in the world. Meanwhile, my son was telling me we were in danger. Without thinking, I grabbed Grant's laptop from his briefcase and slid it under my seat. If he was planning something, I needed to know what. Grant returned 5 minutes later, none the wiser. We drove to the airport in tense silence, Jazz pretending to nap while I smiled and nodded at Grant's endless commentary about his big presentation. Because apparently, even when potentially planning my demise, the man couldn't resist a good monologue. After dropping him at departures, I sat in the airport parking lot with shaking hands and opened his laptop. What I found made my stomach hit my shoes. Insurance policies. Life insurance policies worth millions on both me and Jazz, taken out just 3 months ago. There were email threads with lawyers, financial documents I'd never seen, and folders labeled with my name containing information that made my skin crawl. But the worst part? Text messages discussing neutralizing the page problem and ensuring everything looked like an accident. I'd married a man who wanted me dead, and he'd been planning it for months. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely scroll through Grant's laptop, but what I was seeing was crystal clear. My husband had been systematically planning to get rid of me and Jazz, and he'd been thorough about it. There were screenshots of our daily routines, notes about our schedules, even a detailed floor plan of our house with specific markings I didn't want to think about too hard. Because nothing says loving husband like documenting your wife's morning jog route for mysterious purposes. I forced myself to keep reading. Grant had been embezzling money from his investment firm for over a year. The amounts were staggering. We're talking millions of dollars that should have been in client accounts. He'd used our joint assets as collateral for loans that were now coming due, and when investigators inevitably came sniffing around, he needed us gone so he could disappear with a clean slate and a fat life insurance payout. Jazz stirred in the backseat. Mommy, are we going home now? Not a chance in hell, kid. Actually, Jazz, we're going on a little adventure first. Remember how you always wanted to stay in a real motel like in the movies? His eyes lit up. With the ice machine and everything? Especially the ice machine. I drove to the seediest motel I could find on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that charged by the hour and asked no questions. The Sleepy Inn looked like it hadn't been updated since the Carter administration, and the carpet in our room was questionable, but it was cash only and off anyone's radar. While Jazz was fascinated by the ancient TV remote, I continued my deep dive into Grant's digital life. The man had been busy. He'd hired people, and by people, I mean the kind who don't carry business cards. There were payments to individuals with names like Tank and Diesel, which either meant Grant was planning a very aggressive car wash or something much worse. I found emails discussing timing. Grant wanted to be on his business trip with an airtight alibi when whatever was supposed to happen to us happened. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. House fire, gas leak, or maybe a home invasion gone wrong. Any of these would look like tragedy, not murder, and Grant would return to find his family dead and his financial problem solved. My phone buzzed. A text from Grant. Landed safely. Love you both. See you Sunday. I stared at those words and felt something cold settle in my chest. Love you both. Right. Nothing says love like hiring hitmen. I turned off my phone completely. If Grant was tracking our location, that ended now. Jazz and I were officially off the grid until I figured out our next move. But here's the thing about being underestimated for 12 years. People forget you have a brain. That first night at the motel, I barely slept. Not because of the questionable stains on the comforter or the suspicious sounds coming from the room next door, but because my mind was racing. Jazz was curled up beside me, finally peaceful for the first time since his terrifying revelation in the car. I spent hours going through every file on Grant's laptop with the dedication of a forensic accountant, which, given my business degree that Grant loved to dismiss as cute, wasn't entirely inappropriate. Turns out those years of managing our household finances and volunteering as treasurer for every committee Grant wanted me on had actually taught me a thing or two about following money trails. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. Grant hadn't just stolen from his company. He'd created an elaborate web of shell companies, fake investments, and forged documents. Client money had been flowing into accounts in the Cayman Islands for months. He'd even used our home as collateral for loans I'd never signed for, somehow forging my signature on documents that put everything we owned at risk. But the truly brilliant part of his plan? Once Jazz and I were dead, he'd be the grieving widower who'd inherited everything. Our life insurance, the house, my small inheritance from my grandmother. It would all be his to liquidate before disappearing to whatever non-extradition country had caught his fancy. Mommy, Jazz mumbled sleepily. Is Daddy coming back? Not if I have anything to say about it, sweetheart. The next morning, I sent Jazz to the vending machine with a handful of quarters while I made some calls. First, I contacted a lawyer. Not our family lawyer, who was probably in Grant's pocket, but a complete stranger from 3 towns over. I scheduled an appointment under my maiden name for the following day. Then, I started documenting everything. Screenshots, photos of documents, detailed notes about dates and amounts. If Grant thought he was dealing with the same pushover who'd spent 12 years nodding and smiling while he talked down to her, he was about to get a very rude awakening. I'd found references in his emails to the house being taken care of while he was away. That could mean only one thing. Whatever Grant had planned was happening this weekend, probably tonight. My stomach churned thinking about what would have happened if Jazz hadn't overheard that phone call. But there was something else in those files that gave me hope. Grant was sloppy. For all his planning, he'd left digital fingerprints everywhere. He'd used his real name on accounts he should have kept anonymous. He'd sent incriminating emails from his work computer. He'd even taken photos of our house and neighborhood using his phone, which meant they were backed up to his cloud storage with GPS coordinates. The man was brilliant at manipulation, but apparently terrible at actual crime. Jazz returned with armfuls of snacks and a huge grin. Mommy, the ice machine works, but it's really loud. That's perfect, baby. Loud is exactly what we need right now. Saturday morning brought a decision I never thought I'd have to make. Did I dare go back to our neighborhood to see if Grant's plan was already in motion? Logic said stay hidden, but I needed to know what we were dealing with. Plus, I'll admit, morbid curiosity was eating me alive. I parked 3 blocks away and walked to Mrs. Henderson's house across the street from ours. She'd always been kind to me, and more importantly, she was the kind of neighbor who knew everyone's business. When I knocked, she opened the door with a surprised smile. Paige, I thought you and Jazz were out of town this weekend. Interesting. Who told you that? Grant mentioned it when I saw him leaving yesterday. Said you'd gone to visit your sister in Chicago. I don't have a sister in Chicago. I barely have a sister anywhere, and she lives in Portland. But Grant had clearly been setting up alibis and explanations for our absence. Mrs. Henderson, I need to ask you a huge favor, and I need you to not ask questions. Can I watch our house from your front window for about an hour? To her credit, she just nodded and pointed to her living room. Coffee? From her window, I had a perfect view of our house. Everything looked normal at first. Same red door, same perfectly manicured lawn that Grant paid someone else to maintain because heaven forbid he push a mower himself. But as I watched, I noticed things. A van had been parked on our street since I arrived, but no one had gotten out. 2 men in casual clothes had walked past our house twice, each time slowing down to look at something. Then I saw them. At 11:47 a.m., 2 men approached our front door. They didn't knock. They had keys. They went inside like they belonged there, and my blood ran cold. These weren't burglars. This was a professional operation. Grant had given them access to our home. I watched through Mrs. Henderson's lace curtains as they moved through our house systematically. One stayed downstairs while the other went upstairs. They were in there for exactly 18 minutes. When they came out, one was carrying something small that he slipped into his jacket pocket. Everything all right, dear? Mrs. Henderson asked softly. Call 911, I whispered. Tell them you think you saw someone break into my house. But before she could reach the phone, The men were gone. The van pulled away slowly, like they had all the time in the world. Because they probably did. Grant wasn't supposed to be back until tomorrow, and Jazz and I were supposed to be dead by then. I stayed at Mrs. Henderson's window for another hour, but the street remained quiet. Whatever they'd done inside our house was finished. All that remained was for us to come home and trigger whatever they'd left behind. The sick part? If Jazz hadn't overheard that phone call, we would have walked right into it. We would have come home Sunday evening, tired from the airport, and, well, that would have been the end of us. But Grant had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated his wife's ability to disappear when she needed to. Back at our luxurious motel accommodations, I laid out everything I'd discovered like a detective mapping a crime scene across the faded floral bedspread. Photos of documents, printed emails, a timeline of Grant's financial crimes, and now confirmation that our house had been compromised. Jazz was building elaborate structures with ice cubes in the bathroom sink, blissfully unaware that we were essentially refugees from our own life. The lawyer I'd contacted, Patricia Martinez, had agreed to see me that afternoon at her office. I'd told her I needed help with urgent family matters involving potential fraud, which was putting it mildly. Before leaving for the appointment, I set up a digital insurance policy of my own, using the motel's ancient computer in the lobby, because apparently even sketchy motels had business centers now. I uploaded every piece of evidence to 3 separate cloud storage accounts. Then I drafted detailed emails explaining everything I'd discovered, complete with photo evidence, and scheduled them to send automatically if I didn't log in to cancel them within 48 hours. One was addressed to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, another to Grant's company's board of directors, and the third to a reporter I'd found who specialized in white-collar crime. Because if Grant thought he was playing chess while I played checkers, he was about to learn that I'd been studying the board a lot longer than he realized. Patricia Martinez turned out to be exactly what I needed. A sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who'd built her practice on helping people escape bad situations. When I finished explaining everything, she leaned back in her chair and whistled softly. "Mrs. Miller, your husband has committed at least 8 felonies that I can identify, and that's just from what you've shown me. The question is, what do you want to do about it?" "I want to protect my son and make sure Grant pays for this." "Good, because you have enough evidence here to put him away for decades." She started making notes. "But first we need to make sure you and Jazz are completely safe. Then we start building the case that destroys him." She recommended a private investigator who specialized in financial crimes and had contacts at the FBI. She also suggested we stay hidden until Grant was back in the country and could be arrested. If he realizes you know what he's done, he might panic and do something even more desperate. I thought about those men walking through my house with keys, about the 18 minutes they'd spent inside, about whatever they'd taken from our home. "I think we're past the point of worrying about Grant panicking," I said. Patricia smiled grimly. "Then let's make sure when he does panic, we're ready for him." That evening, I called Grant from a burner phone I'd picked up at a gas station. "Paige, where are you calling from? This number isn't—" "My phone died and I forgot my charger. We're having a great time in Chicago." The lie came easily. "Jazz loves the museum." "Chicago?" There was confusion in his voice. "I thought you were going to your mother's in Portland." "Interesting." Grant couldn't keep his own cover stories straight. Change of plans. My sister surprised me with tickets to that exhibit Jazz wanted to see. I improvised smoothly, enjoying the silence on his end. "How's your conference?" "Fine. Great. Look, I should go. Dinner meeting." "Love you too, honey. See you tomorrow night." After I hung up, I smiled for the first time in days. Grant was scrambling, trying to figure out how his carefully laid plans had gone wrong. And tomorrow, when he came home expecting to find us dead, and instead found us very much alive and very much aware of his crimes, that's when the real fun would begin. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of clarity that comes after the worst kind of revelation. I woke up in that awful motel room feeling more focused than I had in years. Jazz was still sleeping, one arm wrapped around the ice bucket he'd claimed as his new best friend, and for a moment I just watched him breathe. This beautiful, innocent kid who'd saved both our lives by being brave enough to speak up about what he'd heard. Grant's flight was scheduled to land at 3 p.m. I'd been tracking it obsessively, waiting for the moment when he'd be back on American soil and within reach of federal authorities. Patricia had contacted her FBI friend, Agent Sarah Chen, who was very interested in Grant's creative accounting practices. Apparently, financial crimes involving millions of dollars and potential murder plots got their attention quickly. But first, I had one more thing to confirm. I drove back to our neighborhood around noon, this time parking even further away and approaching through the Hendersons' backyard. Mrs. Henderson had become my unofficial partner in crime surveillance, bringing me coffee and homemade cookies while I watched our house through her kitchen window. "Still think you should call the police directly," she murmured, refilling my mug. "Soon," I promised. "Very soon." At 12:30, I saw what I'd been waiting for. The same van from yesterday returned to our street. The same two men got out, but this time they looked agitated. They approached our house, used their keys again, and went inside. They were only in there for 5 minutes this time before rushing back out, one of them clearly speaking urgently into a phone. They'd realized we weren't coming home when we were supposed to. Grant's perfect plan was falling apart, and his hired help was probably demanding answers about why their targets had mysteriously disappeared. "Mrs. Henderson," I said calmly, "now would be a good time to call 911. While she dialed, I called Agent Chen directly. "They're at the house right now. The men Grant hired. If you move fast, you can catch them in the act. We'll have units there in 10 minutes. Are you safe?" "Safe and far away. But Agent Chen? Grant's flight lands at 3 p.m. United Flight 1247 from Boston. He's expecting to come home to dead bodies and an insurance payout. He's going to be very disappointed." Within 20 minutes, our quiet suburban street was crawling with FBI agents and local police. I watched from Mrs. Henderson's window as they surrounded our house and arrested two very surprised-looking men who definitely weren't there to fix the plumbing. One of them broke immediately, apparently deciding that cooperation was better than loyalty to whatever Grant was paying them. Within an hour, Agent Chen called to tell me they'd found the device the men had planted in our gas line, a sophisticated little bomb designed to look like a gas leak explosion. If we'd come home and lit our fireplace or even turned on the stove, the whole house would have gone up. "Your husband's thorough. I'll give him that," Agent Chen said grimly, "but he's also going to spend the rest of his life in federal prison." At 3:47 p.m., Grant Miller was arrested at baggage claim at Logan International Airport. I wasn't there to see it. Jazz and I were safely tucked away in a different hotel, this one with clean carpets and working air conditioning, but Agent Chen sent me photos. Grant looked genuinely shocked. The expression on his face was priceless, pure confusion mixed with dawning horror as federal agents explained his rights while his fellow passengers stared. My phone rang an hour later. It was Grant's one phone call from jail. "Paige? Paige, what the hell is happening? The FBI arrested me. They're saying I tried to kill you. This is insane. You have to help me." "Hello, Grant," I said pleasantly. "Having a good trip?" The silence stretched for several seconds. "You knew," he whispered finally. "I knew you were stealing from your clients. I knew you wanted Jazz and me dead. I knew about the life insurance policies, the hired killers, and that adorable little bomb they planted in our gas line." I paused, enjoying his ragged breathing on the other end. "What I didn't know was how incredibly stupid you were about covering your tracks." "You can't prove anything? Grant?" "Honey, I can prove everything. The FBI has your laptop, your phone records, your financial documents, and two very chatty accomplices who are falling over themselves to explain how you hired them to murder your family. Oh, and the best part? It turns out when you forge someone's signature on loan documents, banks keep very good records of that." Another long silence. "Jazz," he said finally. "Where's Jazz? Let me talk to my son." "Your son is safe. He's also the reason you're sitting in federal custody instead of collecting life insurance money. Turns out the kid you've ignored for 10 years was paying attention after all." I could hear him starting to panic, his voice rising. "Paige, listen to me. We can work this out. There's money offshore, we can disappear, start over. Grant, remember all those times you told me I wasn't smart enough to understand your business? That I should stick to managing playdates and grocery lists? Paige, turns out I understand your business just fine. I also understand how to make federal agents very, very interested in white-collar criminals who try to murder their families for insurance money." I hung up before he could respond, then immediately blocked his number. Because honestly, I'd heard enough from Grant Miller to last several lifetimes. Jazz looked up from his coloring book. "Was that Daddy?" "That was Daddy. But you don't have to worry about him anymore, sweetheart. He's not going to be bothering us for a very long time." "Good," Jazz said simply, returning to his drawing. "He wasn't very nice to us anyway." Out of the mouths of babes. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal meetings, FBI interviews, and the surreal experience of watching my husband become front-page news. Local investment advisor arrested for fraud and attempted murder was splashed across every newspaper in the state. Apparently, trying to blow up your wife and child for insurance money was the kind of story that captured public attention. Who would have thought? Jazz and I stayed in our hotel while investigators combed through every aspect of Grant's financial empire. Agent Chen kept me updated on their progress, and honestly, the scope of his crimes was impressive in the worst possible way. He'd stolen over $12 million from client accounts, created fake investment portfolios, and forged documents with the creativity of a fiction writer. If he'd put half that energy into being a decent husband and father, we might have had a completely different story. But here's where Grant's plan really fell apart. and where my business degree finally came in handy. When you commit financial crimes using jointly owned assets as collateral, and your spouse had no knowledge of those crimes, the law has some very interesting provisions. Essentially, everything Grant had put at risk to fund his schemes legally reverted to me as the innocent party. Patricia Martinez explained it during one of our meetings, her eyes practically gleaming. Paige, your husband used your house, your joint savings, even your car as collateral for fraudulent loans. Since you can prove you knew nothing about these transactions, and since he was committing felonies when he made them, you're entitled to recover everything. Define everything. The house, the cars, the boat you mentioned, all joint assets, plus his share of legitimate investments. We're talking about roughly $2.8 million in recoverable assets. I stared at her. $2.8 million? That's just from the joint property. His company is also facing a massive civil suit from defrauded clients. And there's likely to be additional settlements. Jazz looked up from his coloring book. Mommy, are we rich now? I think we might be, sweetheart. But here's the thing about suddenly acquiring wealth from your criminal husband's downfall. It comes with a lot of complicated feelings. Relief? Obviously. Vindication? Definitely. But also a strange sort of grief for the life I'd thought I was living, even if that life had been built on lies. Agent Chen called that afternoon with an update. Grant's pleading guilty to avoid a trial. His lawyers are negotiating, but he's looking at minimum 25 years federal prison, probably more. 25 years. Jazz would be 35 when Grant got out, if he ever did. My son would grow up, graduate high school, college, maybe start his own family, all without the father who'd tried to kill us both. How do you feel about that? Agent Chen asked gently. Honestly, relieved. I was dreading the thought of testifying, of Jazz having to relive this. And Grant's been asking to see you, to talk. I almost laughed. Hard pass. I think we've said everything we need to say to each other. That evening, Jazz and I sat in our hotel room eating room service burgers and planning our future. It felt surreal. This time last month, I'd been worried about whether we could afford Jazz's summer camp. Now I was suddenly a millionaire, albeit under the strangest circumstances imaginable. Mommy, do we have to go back to our house? What do you think, baby? He wrinkled his nose. It doesn't feel safe anymore. And it smells like Daddy's cologne, out of the mouths of babes. Our house was legally ours, but it would always be the place where Grant had planned our deaths, where strangers had planted a bomb in our gas line, where we would have died if not for a 10-year-old's sharp ears and brave heart. You're right. I think it's time for a fresh start somewhere new. Like where? I pulled out my laptop and opened a map. Anywhere we want, Jazz. Anywhere in the whole world. What do you think will happen next? Drop your predictions in the comments below. You might be surprised by where this journey takes us. The house sold faster than I expected. Apparently, even a house where someone tried to commit insurance fraud murder has its appeal when priced correctly. Plus, I may have been slightly motivated to get rid of the place. Every day we stayed in that hotel was another day of freedom from Grant's ghost haunting our old life. The buyers were a young couple who seemed genuinely excited about the potential for renovation. I didn't have the heart to tell them the potential they were most excited about was removing all traces of my previous existence there. Although I did make sure they knew about the new gas line. Safety first. People. Patricia had connected me with a financial advisor who specialized in sudden wealth syndrome, which apparently was a real thing and not just something I'd made up to describe my current mental state. Sarah Chen. Yes, Agent Chen had recommended her own sister because apparently competence ran in the family, helped me understand exactly what I was working with. After taxes, legal fees, and debt settlement, you're looking at approximately $2.1 million in liquid assets, Sarah explained during our meeting. Plus Grant's legitimate retirement accounts, which you're entitled to as spouse, bring you to about $2.4 million total. Jazz was building a fort under her desk while we talked. Is that enough to buy a castle? He asked seriously. Not a full castle, Sarah said with a smile, but definitely enough to live very comfortably wherever you choose. That's when the idea hit me. Where did I want to live? For 12 years, I'd lived where Grant wanted to live, in the house Grant chose, in the neighborhood that impressed Grant's colleagues. But now I could live anywhere. Jazz, if you could live anywhere in the world, where would it be? He popped his head out of the blanket fort. Somewhere with a beach? And maybe where it doesn't snow so much. Oh, and good ice cream. Excellent criteria. Let's start looking. We spent the next week researching potential destinations. Jazz voted for Hawaii. They have volcanoes, Mom. While I found myself drawn to California. Specifically, a small coastal town about an hour north of San Diego. The pictures online showed quiet beaches, charming downtown areas, and the kind of relaxed lifestyle that seemed like the opposite of everything our old life had been. I called a realtor there on a whim. Hi, this might sound crazy, but I'm looking to relocate from the East Coast with my 10-year-old son. We're looking for somewhere safe, quiet, with good schools. You've called the right place, said Maria Santos, who had the kind of warm voice that made you trust her immediately. When are you thinking of making this move? How does next month sound? That soon? May I ask what's prompting the quick timeline? I paused, wondering how much to explain. Let's just say my husband turned out to be someone I didn't think he was, and we need a fresh start. I understand completely. I have several properties that might work perfectly. 3 days later, Jazz and I were on a plane to California. I'd never made such an impulsive decision in my life, but then again, I'd never been in a position where impulsive decisions were financially viable. The old Paige would have researched for months, made pro and con lists, worried about every possible outcome. The new Paige, the one who'd outsmarted a criminal husband and survived a murder plot, was apparently more decisive. The town was even more beautiful in person. Maria met us at the small regional airport, and as we drove through tree-lined streets toward the coast, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: excitement about the future. There, Jazz said, pressing his nose to the car window as we crested a hill. The Pacific Ocean spread out below us, endless and blue and completely different from anything we'd known back east. That's where I want to live. And you know what? That's exactly what we did. The house Maria showed us was perfect in a way that seemed almost too good to be true. A 1920s craftsman cottage just 3 blocks from the beach, with a wraparound porch, original hardwood floors, and a kitchen that actually got sunlight. The backyard was small but private, with a lemon tree that Jazz immediately claimed as his personal fruit headquarters. It's been on the market for 6 months, Maria explained as we toured the bright, airy rooms. The owners moved to Arizona and are motivated to sell. What's wrong with it? I asked. Because 12 years with Grant had taught me to look for catches. Honestly, nothing. It just hasn't found the right family yet. Jazz ran from room to room, his footsteps echoing on the polished floors. Mom, there's a window seat in the bedroom, and the bathroom has a clawfoot tub. I stood in what would be my new kitchen, looking out at the garden where the previous owners had planted herbs and vegetables, and felt something settle in my chest. Peace, maybe. Or just the absence of fear. We'll take it, I said. Maria blinked. Don't you want to think about it? See some other properties? Nope. This is home. The closing process moved quickly when you could pay cash and had no contingencies. Within 3 weeks, Jazz and I were officially California residents, owners of a house that felt more like home than anywhere we'd ever lived. Our first night there, we ordered pizza and sat on the porch swing watching the sunset. Jazz was already making friends with the neighbor kids, and I was making friends with the concept of not constantly looking over my shoulder. Mom, Jazz said thoughtfully, I like it here. It feels different. How so? Quieter. But not scary quiet. Good quiet. That kid had a point. It was good quiet. The kind where you could hear yourself think instead of constantly bracing for the next crisis. My phone rang. Patricia Martinez with an update from the East Coast. Grant's sentencing is scheduled for next month. 28 years federal prison, plus restitution to his victims. His assets will be liquidated to pay settlements. And the civil suits? Several of his victims are filing against his estate, but since you were also a victim and had no knowledge of his crimes, your settlement is protected. I watched Jazz chase fireflies in our new backyard. Good. Those people deserve their money back. There's one more thing. Grant's been writing you letters. The prison has been forwarding them to my office. Do you want me to send them? I considered this for exactly 2 seconds. No. Return them to sender. All of them? He's written 7 so far. All of them. Forever. I'm done with Grant's version of our story. After hanging up, I sat on my new porch swing in my new California evening, listening to my son's laughter echo across our new neighborhood, somewhere back east. Grant was sitting in a federal prison cell, probably writing another letter I'd never read, planning another manipulation I'd never fall for. But here's the funny thing about rock bottom. It gives you a really solid foundation to build on. 6 months into our new California life, I barely recognized myself. Not just because of the highlights I'd gotten from a stylist who actually listened to what I wanted, instead of what would complement Grant's professional image, but because of how different I felt inside. Jazz had settled into his new school like he'd been born for it. His teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, was the kind of educator who actually saw kids as individuals rather than test scores, and she'd helped him process everything that had happened with age-appropriate counseling and patience. Watching him make friends and laugh freely was like watching a plant that had been kept in shade finally get sunlight. As for me, I was discovering who Paige Miller was when she wasn't walking on eggshells. I'd started volunteering at the local women's shelter, helping other women navigate the financial and legal complexities of leaving abusive situations. Turns out, my experience with Grant's financial manipulations translated pretty well to helping other people untangle themselves from similar messes. Who knew that surviving a sociopathic husband would become a marketable skill? You should consider going back to school, suggested Dr. Lisa Park, the shelter's director, during one of our weekly planning meetings. We could use someone with your background in our advocacy program. I don't know. It's been so long since I was in an academic environment. Paige, you dismantled a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme while hiding in a motel. I think you can handle graduate coursework. She had a point. That afternoon, I called the local university's continuing education office. The woman who answered was enthusiastic about their master's in social work program, especially when I mentioned my interest in financial advocacy for domestic violence survivors. We have classes starting in the fall, she said. Would you like to schedule a campus visit? Yes, I said without hesitation. The old Paige would have hemmed and hawed, worried about whether Grant would approve, whether I was smart enough, whether it would interfere with his needs. The new Paige, she was apparently ready to take on the world. That evening, Jazz and I walked to the beach to watch the sunset. It had become our daily ritual, this quiet time together where we could talk about anything or nothing at all. Mom, are you happier now? He asked as we settled onto our favorite piece of driftwood. Much happier, are you? Yeah, I like that you smile more, and I like that you don't jump when the phone rings anymore. I hadn't realized he'd noticed that, but kids see everything. For months after Grant's arrest, every phone call had made me tense, waiting for some new crisis or legal complication. Now, my phone rang with calls from new friends, volunteer coordinators, professors excited about my application. Jazz, how would you feel about mommy going back to school? To learn what? How to help other families who are in situations like we were. Families where someone isn't being nice to them. He considered this seriously. Would you still have time for ice cream runs? Definitely. Ice cream runs are non-negotiable. Then I think it's a good idea. You're really good at helping people. As we walked home, I thought about how much our lives had changed. A year ago, I was tiptoeing around Grant's moods, managing his schedule, making myself smaller to accommodate his ego. Now I was making decisions based on what Jazz and I actually wanted and needed. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, my financial advisor back east. Saw the news about Grant's victim restitution. Final total was $8.7 million recovered for his clients. Thought you'd want to know, justice was served. I showed the text to Jazz. Remember how Daddy took money that wasn't his? Yeah. Well, the people he took it from are getting it back now. Good. Stealing is wrong. Yes, it is, but sometimes, even when people do wrong things, it's possible to make things right again. We climbed the steps to our porch, where the lemon tree was heavy with fruit, and the evening air smelled like jasmine instead of fear. Mom? Yeah, baby. I'm glad Daddy's not here anymore. Is that bad? I pulled him close. Hold. No, sweetheart. It's not bad at all. Sometimes the best thing someone can do for a family is leave it alone. 1 year later, I was sitting in my first graduate school class when my phone buzzed with a call from Patricia Martinez. I let it go to voicemail, but the urgency in her message made me step out during the break. Paige, call me back immediately. Grant's appealing his sentence, and his new lawyer is claiming you had knowledge of his financial activities. They're trying to get his conviction overturned. My blood went cold, not because I was afraid of the legal challenge. We had enough evidence to bury Grant twice over, but because the thought of him trying to claw his way back into our lives made my skin crawl. I called Patricia from my car after class. How worried should I be? I asked without preamble. On a scale of 1 to 10? About a 2. His new lawyer is grasping at straws, trying to create reasonable doubt where none exists. But it does mean we'll need to review all the evidence again, and you might have to testify if it goes to a hearing. Will Jazz be involved? Not directly. He was a minor when this happened, and his testimony is protected. But Grant's lawyer might try to paint you as the mastermind behind the whole scheme. I actually laughed. Right. I masterminded my husband's attempt to murder me and our son for insurance money. That makes perfect sense. I know. It's desperate. But desperate people do stupid things. Are you prepared for this fight? I looked through my windshield at the university campus, where I'd just spent 2 hours learning about advocacy strategies for vulnerable populations, where I was building a career around helping people who'd survived situations like mine, where I was becoming the kind of person who could handle whatever Grant threw at us. Patricia, a year ago, I might have been terrified, but the Grant who's sitting in federal prison isn't the same man who used to intimidate me. He's just a convicted felon with a bad lawyer and worse judgment. Good answer. I'll keep you posted on developments. That evening, I told Jazz about Grant's appeal over dinner. He'd grown 6 inches in the past year, and his confidence had grown along with his height. "Is he trying to get out of jail?" Jazz asked, twirling pasta around his fork. "He's trying, but it's not going to work. The evidence against him is too strong." "Good. He made bad choices and he should stay in jail." Sometimes my kid's clarity was startling. "Jazz, if this goes to court, people might ask questions about what you remember from that day. Are you okay talking about it?" He nodded seriously. "I told the truth then, and I'll tell the truth now. Daddy said bad things were going to happen to us, and then bad people came to our house. That's what happened." 3 months later, Grant's appeal was denied so decisively that the judge included commentary about frivolous legal maneuvers in his ruling. Patricia called to give me the news while I was studying for midterms. "It's over," she said simply. "Grant's conviction stands, his sentence stands, and his lawyer just got sanctioned for wasting the court's time. And the civil suits? Also resolved. All his victims have been made whole from the recovered assets." I set down my textbook and walked out to our back porch, where Jazz was doing homework at the table under our lemon tree. The afternoon light was golden and warm, and I could hear the ocean in the distance. "Is everything okay, Mom?" Jazz looked up from his math homework. "Everything's perfect, sweetheart. Daddy's appeal was denied. It's really over now." "Cool. Can you help me with this word problem? It's about trains." And just like that, we moved on. Because that's what you do when you're building a new life. You don't let the old one keep interrupting. 2 years after fleeing our old life in a panic, I walked across the stage to receive my master's degree in social work. Jazz cheered from the audience, sitting next to Maria Santos and Dr. Park, who'd become like family to us. As I held my diploma, I thought about how far we'd traveled, not just geographically, but emotionally. The scared woman who'd hidden in a motel with her son was gone. In her place stood someone who'd built a new life through determination, legal strategy, and a refusal to let Grant's crimes define her future. After graduation, I accepted a position with the county's domestic violence prevention program. My job was to help survivors navigate the financial and legal complexities of leaving abusive situations, exactly what I'd wished someone could have done for me. It was meaningful work that used everything I'd learned the hard way. Jazz, now 12 and almost as tall as me, had grown into a confident kid who spoke up when something wasn't right. He'd kept the instincts that saved our lives but lost the fear that used to shadow him. His favorite hobby was still investigating things. He'd become the neighborhood's unofficial lost pet detective and had helped reunite 6 cats and 3 dogs with their families. "You know," he said one evening as we sat on our porch swing, "I'm glad all that stuff happened." "Really?" "Well, not the scary parts. But if Daddy hadn't been a bad guy, we never would have moved here. And I like our life here." He had a point. Our California life was everything our old life hadn't been. Peaceful, honest, and built on choices we'd made together. "Plus," Jazz added with a grin, "you're way cooler now than you used to be." "Excuse me?" "Before, you always seemed worried about making Daddy mad. Now you just do what you think is right. It's better." Out of the mouths of babes. That night, after Jazz was asleep, I sat in my home office updating case files for my new job. My desk looked out at our garden, where the vegetables I'd planted were thriving, and the lemon tree was heavy with fruit. On the wall hung my diploma, a photo of Jazz and me at his 6th grade graduation, and a newspaper clipping from Grant's sentencing. Not because I was dwelling on the past, but because I never wanted to forget how far we'd come. My phone rang. Sarah, my financial advisor, with the final numbers from Grant's asset liquidation. "After all settlements and legal fees, your total recovered assets are just over $2.7 million, she reported. "Your investment portfolio is performing well, and with your new salary, you're in excellent financial shape. Thank you for everything, Sarah. Thank you for showing me that it's possible to turn a nightmare into a success story." After hanging up, I made myself a cup of tea and stepped out onto the porch. The night air smelled like jasmine and ocean salt, and I could hear Jazz sleeping peacefully in his room. Tomorrow, I'd go to work helping other women find their way out of impossible situations. This weekend, Jazz and I were planning a camping trip to the mountains. It was a good life, better than good. It was a life we'd chosen and built together. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. For a split second, my old reflexes kicked in and I tensed. Then I remembered. Grant was in federal prison and would be for the next 26 years. Unknown numbers were just unknown numbers now, not threats. The text was from a woman I'd helped last month. "Started my new job today. Thank you for believing in me." I smiled, finished my tea, and went inside to check on Jazz one more time before bed. He was sprawled across his mattress like he owned the world, which in many ways, he did. We both did. Because here's what I learned from surviving Grant's attempt to destroy us. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the thing that sets you free. And sometimes the family that's supposed to protect you is the one you need protection from. But that's okay, because you can build a new family from the people who choose to love you, and that family can be stronger than anything based on obligation or fear. As I turned off the lights and headed to bed, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at me was confident, peaceful, and genuinely happy. She looked nothing like the anxious, diminished person I'd been during my marriage to Grant. That woman was gone, and good riddance. And good. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe. And remember, you're stronger than you know, and sometimes the end of everything you thought you wanted is actually the beginning of everything you need. I tucked Jazz in one more time, kissed his forehead, and whispered what had become my nightly promise to both of us. Sweet dreams, baby. We're safe, we're free, and tomorrow is going to be another beautiful day. And you know what? It was.